My grandmother, Louise, was the only person in my family who truly understood me. She passed away 6 months ago, leaving me everything she had. For 4 years, I was the one who stayed by her side, held her hand through the hardest days, and made sure she never felt alone. Then out of nowhere, my brother Derek called. He had not spoken to me in 3 years. He said he was getting married and needed to talk about something important. I felt hope rising in my chest, but something also felt wrong. Before we dive into what happened next, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you have ever dealt with family members who only show up when they want something, hit that like button right now. And if you are new here, subscribe so you do not miss stories like this one. What would you do if your own family treated your grandmother's final wish like a blank check for their luxury dreams? Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my own blood. To understand why this situation hurt so deeply, I need to tell you about my grandmother, Louise. She was a remarkable woman who built her life from nothing. After my grandfather passed away when she was 55 years old, she did not crumble. Instead, she opened a small bakery on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. Every morning before sunrise, she would be there, kneading dough, frosting cakes, and greeting customers with a warmth that made everyone feel like family. That bakery became legendary in our neighborhood. People drove from miles away just to taste her cinnamon rolls and apple pie. When she finally retired at 72, she sold the bakery and kept the modest savings she had accumulated over decades of hard work. Combined with her small house, she had built a comfortable nest egg for her final years. She was proud of what she had accomplished, and rightfully so. Everything she owned, she had earned with her own 2 hands. I was 22 years old, and fresh out of college, when we received the news that changed everything. Grandma Louise had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The doctors said it was still in the early stages, but she would need increasing care as time went on. I remember sitting in that sterile hospital waiting room watching my family react to the news. My parents said they were too busy with their careers to take on caregiving responsibilities. My father worked as a regional manager for a manufacturing company, always traveling, always unavailable. My mother had her social clubs and charity events that she claimed she could not abandon. And Derek, my older brother, was chasing his dreams in Los Angeles, building what he called an empire in real estate sales. None of them even considered rearranging their lives for the woman who had loved us unconditionally. So I made a decision that would define the next 4 years of my life. I moved into Grandma Louise's house and became her primary caregiver. I was lucky enough to work as a software engineer, which meant I could do most of my job remotely. Every morning I would help her with her medications and breakfast. Every afternoon I would take her for walks in the garden she loved so much. Every evening we would sit together in her living room watching old movies from the 1950s and 60s. She would tell me stories about my grandfather, about the early days of her bakery, about a life filled with struggle and triumph. Those 4 years were not easy. Parkinson's is a cruel disease that slowly steals a person's independence. I watched my grandmother go from a vibrant, independent woman to someone who needed help with the most basic tasks. There were nights when I barely slept, days when I felt overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility, but I would not trade those years for anything. In caring for her, I learned what love truly means. It is not words or promises. It is showing up day after day, even when it is hard. Grandma Louise passed away 6 months ago, peacefully in her sleep. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath. The funeral was small, just me and a few of her old friends from the bakery days. My parents sent flowers but said they could not make the trip from Sacramento. Derek did not even bother with an excuse. He simply did not show up. 2 weeks after the funeral, I sat in a lawyer's office and heard my grandmother's last wishes read aloud. She had left everything to me. The house valued at around $80,000. Her savings account containing $70,000. Everything. The lawyer handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in her familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter that I have read so many times I have memorized every word. She wrote, "My dear Ivan, you are the only one who stayed when everyone else left. You are the only one who loved me for who I am, not for what I could give you. This inheritance is not a reward. It is my way of telling you that your love mattered. Use it to build a beautiful life. You deserve it." I cried for an hour after reading that letter. I cried for the grandmother I had lost, for the love we shared, and for the bitter truth that the rest of my family had abandoned her. At first I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. Within days of the will being read, my phone started buzzing with messages from family members I had not heard from in years. My mother sent sweet texts about how much she missed me. My father called to ask how I was holding up. Even distant cousins suddenly remembered I existed. I wanted to believe they genuinely cared. I wanted to believe that grief had brought our family closer together. Then Derek called. It was the first time I had heard his voice in 3 years. He sounded warm, friendly, almost like the big brother I remembered from childhood. He told me he was engaged to a woman named Amanda and that they were planning a wedding. He said he wanted me to be his best man. My heart swelled with hope. Maybe this tragedy could heal our broken family. Maybe we could finally be brothers again. Derek invited me to meet him and Amanda in San Francisco, where they lived. He said there was something important he needed to discuss, and he wanted to do it in person. I agreed immediately. I drove 3 hours south, my mind filled with optimistic fantasies about reconciliation and new beginnings. We met at an upscale restaurant in the financial district, the kind of place where a single entree costs more than what most people spend on groceries for a week. Derek looked successful in his tailored suit. Amanda was elegant, dripping with designer accessories and an air of superiority. They greeted me with hugs and smiles, ordered expensive wine, and made small talk about their lives. After the main course, Derek's demeanor shifted. He leaned forward, his expression becoming serious. He said they were planning a destination wedding at a 5-star resort in Monterey. The total cost would be around $120,000. They had already put down deposits, booked vendors, and sent out save-the-dates to 300 guests. The problem, he explained, was that they were short on funds. I felt my stomach tighten as I realized where this conversation was heading. Derek looked me straight in the eye and said, "You know the money Grandma left you? You do not really need all of it, do you? I mean, you are single, you live simply. Amanda and I are building a life together. This wedding is important for our future." I could not believe what I was hearing. Before I could respond, Amanda chimed in with a practiced smile. She said, "This is a family event, Ivan. The whole family will benefit from this celebration. It is only fair that everyone contributes." Derek continued, twisting the knife deeper. He reminded me that Grandma Louise had paid for my college tuition, while he had to take out loans and work multiple jobs to put himself through school. He said I owed the family for the advantages I had received. He said keeping all the inheritance for myself was selfish and ungrateful. I sat there in stunned silence, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. This was not a reunion. This was an ambush. My brother had not called because he missed me or wanted to rebuild our relationship. He called because he saw me as a source of money for his extravagant wedding. I managed to stammer out that I needed time to think about it. Derek's smile tightened, but he nodded and said he understood. As I drove back to Portland that night, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. The hope I had felt just hours earlier had turned to ash in my mouth. The pressure did not stop after that dinner. 2 days later, my father called. His voice was cold and authoritative, the same tone he used when I was a child and had done something wrong. He told me that keeping the entire inheritance was disrespectful to the family. He said that Grandma Louise had been old and confused when she wrote that will, and that any reasonable person would understand the money should be divided equally among her descendants. I tried to explain that Grandma Louise was perfectly lucid when she made her decision. I told him about the letter she had written me about her clear wishes. But my father cut me off. He said I had manipulated an old woman, taken advantage of her vulnerability, and turned her against her own family. He said I should be ashamed of myself. The next day, my mother called with a different approach. She cried on the phone, going on and on about how she had sacrificed so much to raise me, how she had given me everything a child could want. She asked how I could repay her love by tearing the family apart over money. She said Derek was the firstborn, the one who carried the family name, and that it was my duty as the younger brother to support him. I felt myself being pulled in different directions. Part of me wondered if they were right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should just give them what they wanted to keep the peace. The guilt was overwhelming, pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. A month after my dinner with Derek, my parents orchestrated a family meeting at their house in Sacramento. They said it was time to discuss the situation as a family and find a solution that worked for everyone. Naively, I agreed to attend. I thought perhaps if we all sat down together we could have a rational conversation and reach some kind of understanding. When I arrived, I realized I had walked into a trap. It was not just my parents and Derek. Amanda was there along with several aunts, uncles, and cousins I had not seen in years. They were all seated in the living room, arranged like a tribunal with an empty chair in the center, clearly meant for me. For the next 2 hours, I was subjected to what felt like an intervention for a crime I had not committed. One by one, family members lectured me about duty, respect, and the importance of blood ties. An aunt I barely knew told me that family always comes first and that money should never divide us. An uncle suggested that Grandma Louise would be rolling in her grave if she knew how selfish I was being. Derek presented what he called a fair compromise. He said I could keep $30,000 for myself while the remaining money would fund his wedding. Amanda added that this was my chance to prove I was truly part of the family, to show that I valued relationships over material possessions. My father delivered the final blow. He looked at me with eyes full of disappointment and said, "If you cannot do this for your brother, then do not bother calling yourself my son." I left that house in a daze, my mind reeling from the emotional assault I had just endured. For weeks afterward, I questioned everything. Was I wrong? Was I the villain they painted me to be? The doubt ate at me like acid, eroding my confidence and my sense of self. Then something unexpected happened. My phone rang one afternoon and I saw a name I had not thought about in months. It was Katie, my grandmother's younger sister. Aunt Katie was 75 years old, sharp as a tack, and had been one of the witnesses when Grandma Louise signed her will. She asked if I could come visit her. She said there were things I needed to know. I drove to her small cottage outside Eugene, Oregon, not knowing what to expect. Aunt Katie greeted me with tea and cookies, her eyes kind but serious. She sat me down in her cozy living room and began to tell me a story that shattered everything I thought I knew. 3 years before Grandma Louise died, Derek had visited her. It was his only visit during her entire illness. But he had not come to check on her health or spend time with her. He had come to convince her to change her will. Aunt Katie had been there that day, helping with housework, and she heard everything. Derek had told Grandma Louise that I was taking advantage of her. He said I was only living with her to secure the inheritance, that I was a freeloader who did not really care about her well-being. He demanded that she rewrite her will to give him 60% of her estate, arguing that he was the eldest grandchild and deserved the larger share. Grandma Louise had refused. She told Derek that she knew exactly who loved her and who did not. She said actions speak louder than words, and his actions had spoken volumes. Derek had exploded in anger. He called her names I cannot repeat, accused her of favoritism, and stormed out of the house. That was the last time he ever saw her alive. Aunt Katie reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a letter Grandma Louise had written shortly before her death. She had given it to Aunt Katie with instructions to share it with me if the family ever tried to contest the inheritance. The letter read, "My dear Katie, I know what will happen after I am gone. They will come for what I have built, not because they loved me, but because they love money. If Ivan ever doubts himself, show him this letter. Tell him that I chose him not because he was perfect, but because he was present. He held my hand when it trembled. He wiped my tears when I was frightened. He gave me dignity when this disease tried to take it away. The others only saw me as a burden or an opportunity. Ivan saw me as a person. That is why he inherits everything. That is my final wish, and no amount of pressure should change it." I read that letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Grandma Louise had known exactly what she was doing. She had anticipated the greed, the manipulation, the attacks on my character. And she had prepared this gift, this validation, to protect me even from beyond the grave. Aunt Katie told me more. My parents had also called Grandma Louise multiple times, pressuring her to divide her assets. They had threatened to cut off contact to keep her from seeing her grandchildren if she did not comply. Grandma Louise had responded by changing her phone number and reducing her communication with them to holiday cards. The truth was devastating but liberating. My family had not abandoned Grandma Louise because they were busy. They had abandoned her because she refused to be manipulated. And now they were trying to manipulate me. Despite everything I had learned, a small part of me still hoped for redemption. Maybe Derek did not realize how deeply he had hurt our grandmother. Maybe if I gave him a chance to apologize, we could find a path forward. I decided to test this hope one final time. I called Derek and told him I wanted to meet privately, just the two of us, without Amanda or our parents. I said I had been doing a lot of thinking and wanted to have an honest conversation. He agreed eagerly, probably thinking I had finally caved to the pressure. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Portland. I arrived early and chose a table by the window. When Derek walked in, I noticed immediately that something was off. He was nervous, fidgety, avoiding eye contact. He sat down across from me and placed his phone on the table between us, screen facing down. For 15 minutes we made awkward small talk. Then his phone screen lit up with a notification, and I saw what he had been hiding. The voice recorder app was running. He was recording our entire conversation. I felt a cold calm settle over me. I picked up his phone, showed him the screen, and asked simply, "You are recording this?" Derek did not even have the decency to look embarrassed. He shrugged and said it was just a precaution. He said their lawyer had recommended documenting any conversations related to the inheritance in case they needed to pursue legal action later. My heart, which had been holding onto a thread of hope, finally let go. I asked what kind of legal action he was talking about. Derek explained that their attorney believed the will could be contested on grounds of undue influence. He said they could argue that Grandma Louise was not mentally competent when she wrote it, that I had manipulated her during her illness to secure the inheritance for myself. The irony was almost laughable. The man who had verbally abused our grandmother, who had abandoned her in her time of need, who had not even attended her funeral, was now planning to drag her memory through court to steal what she had explicitly wanted me to have. I stood up from the table, my decision crystallizing into absolute clarity. I looked at my brother, this stranger who shared my blood but none of my values, and I told him exactly what I thought. I picked up his phone, stopped the recording, and handed it back to him. Then I spoke slowly and clearly, making sure every word landed with the weight it deserved. I told Derek to keep his phone recording if he wanted. I told him I did not care anymore. What I was about to say I wanted on record. I told him that I knew everything. I knew about his visit to Grandma Louise 3 years ago. I knew about the things he said to her, the names he called her, the way he tried to turn her against me. Aunt Katie had witnessed it all, and she had Grandma Louise's own handwritten letter explaining exactly why she made the choices she did. Derek's face went pale. He had not expected this. He had assumed his secret cruelty would remain buried with our grandmother. I continued. I told him that I would not give him a single dollar from that inheritance. Not because I was greedy, but because giving him that money would be a betrayal of everything Grandma Louise stood for. She worked her entire life to build something meaningful. She watched carefully to see who truly cared about her, and who only cared about what she could provide. She made her decision with full clarity and complete intentionality. Honoring her wishes was the last gift I could give her. I told Derek that if he wanted to take me to court, he was welcome to try. I had Aunt Katie as a witness. I had Grandma Louise's letters. I had a legally executed will that had been prepared by a licensed attorney and properly notarized. His case would fail, and he would waste thousands of dollars on legal fees while publicly humiliating himself and dishonoring our grandmother's memory. Derek sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Amanda, who had apparently been waiting in the car outside, burst into the coffee shop demanding to know what was happening. I did not acknowledge her. I simply gathered my things and walked toward the door. Before I left, I turned back one final time. I told Derek that I used to look up to him when we were children. I used to want to be just like my big brother. But somewhere along the way, he had become someone I did not recognize. Someone who valued money over love, status over family appearance, over substance. I told him I hoped he would find his way back to being a decent person someday, but that I would not be waiting around to see if it happened. I walked out of that coffee shop and did not look back. The confrontation with my parents came next. I drove to Sacramento and requested one final meeting. Unlike the ambush they had orchestrated before, this time, I controlled the setting. I met them at a neutral location, a quiet park near their house where we could talk without the pressure of an audience. I brought copies of Grandma Louise's letters. I read portions aloud, watching their faces as they heard her words describing exactly how they had treated her. I told them what Derek had done during his final visit, the cruel things he had said. My mother tried to interrupt, tried to deflect and minimize, but I did not let her. I told them that I loved them despite everything. They were my parents, and part of me would always carry that bond. But I refused to let them use that bond as a weapon against me. Grandma Louise had taught me that love is demonstrated through actions, not demanded through guilt. Their actions had shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities. I informed them that I would not be attending Derek's wedding. I told them I needed space from the family to heal and to process everything that had happened. I was not cutting them off forever, but I needed them to understand that our relationship could only move forward if they were willing to take responsibility for their behavior and treat me with the respect I deserved. My father was furious. He threatened, he blustered, he said I would regret this decision. My mother cried and pleaded, trying every emotional manipulation she had perfected over the years. But I held firm. I had spent my whole life bending to their expectations, seeking their approval, trying to earn love that should have been given freely. Those days were over. In the weeks that followed, I made decisions about the inheritance that felt right to me. I sold Grandma Louise's house, knowing she would understand. In her letter, she had written that I should use the assets to build a beautiful life, and I intended to honor that wish in my own way. I donated $20,000 to the Parkinson's research department at the hospital where she had received treatment. The donation was made in her name, and they placed a small plaque in the neurology wing, acknowledging her contribution to ongoing research. I like to think that her legacy would help future patients receive better care than she had. I commissioned a beautiful granite bench for the park near her old house, the park where we used to take our afternoon walks. The bench was engraved with her name and her favorite saying, "Love is not what you say, it is what you do." I visited that bench often, sitting there for hours, feeling closer to her than I had since she passed. With the remaining money, I paid off my student loans and invested in my future. I started a small emergency fund, began contributing more to my retirement account, and set aside money for continuing education in my field. These were practical, responsible choices that would provide security for years to come. Grandma Louise would have approved. I also retained a lawyer just in case Derek followed through on his threats. We prepared documentation, gathered evidence, and created a comprehensive defense file. As it turned out, Derek never filed the lawsuit. Whether he realized the case was unwinnable or simply ran out of money for legal fees, I never found out. But the threats stopped, and eventually the angry phone calls and texts faded away too. The first few months after cutting ties with my family were brutal. I had never felt so alone. The people I had grown up with, the people I had trusted and loved, despite their flaws, were suddenly gone from my life. Some nights I would lie awake, wondering if I had made the right choice. Some mornings I would reach for my phone to call my mother before remembering that we were no longer speaking. I started seeing a therapist to work through the complicated emotions. She helped me understand that grief is not just for people who die. You can grieve the loss of relationships, the death of hopes and expectations, the ending of the family you thought you had. She taught me that setting boundaries is not selfish. It is necessary for survival. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. I threw myself into work, taking on challenging projects that required all my focus and energy. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during my years of caregiving. I started volunteering at a local senior center, spending time with elderly people who reminded me of Grandma Louise. It felt like a way to honor her memory while also filling the void she had left behind. One Saturday afternoon at the senior center, I met a woman named Sophie. She was there visiting her grandfather, a kind man with a sharp wit, who immediately reminded me of my grandmother. Sophie and I started talking, and I discovered that she had her own complicated family history. Her parents had divorced when she was young, and she had learned early that family bonds are not always what they seem. We began dating, taking things slow, building trust carefully. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. Sophie understood my wounds without needing lengthy explanations. She never judged me for the distance I maintained from my biological family. She simply accepted me as I was, scars and all. I kept in touch with Aunt Katie, who became the family I chose rather than the family I was born into. We had monthly dinners where she would tell me stories about Grandma Louise that I had never heard before. Through Aunt Katie, I learned about my grandmother's struggles, her dreams, her disappointments, and her triumphs. Each story made me feel more connected to her legacy. About a year after the inheritance drama, I heard through a distant cousin that Derek and Amanda had gotten married after all. Without my contribution, they had been forced to significantly scale back their plans. Instead of a 5-star resort in Monterey, they held the ceremony at a standard event venue in San Francisco. Instead of 300 guests, they invited about 80. I felt no satisfaction at their diminished celebration. I simply noted the information and moved on. 6 months after that, the same cousin informed me that Derek and Amanda were getting divorced. The marriage had crumbled under financial pressure and constant arguments. Apparently, Amanda's expensive tastes had not changed, but their combined income could not support her lifestyle. Derek had taken on debt trying to keep her happy, and the strain eventually destroyed whatever genuine connection they might have had. I wish I could say I felt vindicated, but the truth is more complicated. Part of me was sad for Derek. Beneath all his greed and manipulation, there was still the boy I had grown up with, the brother who taught me to ride a bike and defended me from bullies in elementary school. That version of Derek had been gone for many years, but I mourned him anyway. My parents reached out a few times over the following years. The conversations were awkward, filled with long silences and careful words. They never apologized directly, but their tone softened. They asked about my life without demanding anything. They mentioned missing me without trying to guilt me into reconciliation. It was not much, but it was something. I maintained my boundaries while leaving the door slightly open. I responded to their messages, answered their occasional calls, and even visited for a single afternoon during one holiday season. But I no longer sought their approval or shaped my life around their expectations. The relationship we have now is distant, but peaceful. Perhaps that is the best we can do. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that Grandma Louise gave me more than money or property. She gave me permission to value myself. She showed me that standing up for what is right sometimes means standing alone. She demonstrated that true love does not come with conditions or manipulations or demands. The most important inheritance she left me was not the dollars in her bank account or the equity in her house. It was the understanding that I deserve to be treated with respect, that my worth is not determined by how much I sacrifice for others, and that walking away from toxic relationships is not a failure but a form of courage. I still visit her bench in the park, whenever life feels overwhelming. I sit there and watch the seasons change, the leaves falling and returning, the cycles of life continuing endlessly. Sometimes I talk to her out loud, telling her about Sophie, about my work, about the small joys and challenges of daily existence. I imagine her listening, nodding, offering her quiet wisdom. Sometimes the greatest inheritance is not money or property. It is the courage to know your worth and the wisdom to walk away from those who cannot see it. Grandma Louise gave me both, and for that I will be grateful for the rest of my life. If you have ever faced a situation where family tried to pressure you into giving up something that was rightfully yours, I would love to hear your story. How did you handle it? What did you learn? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your words might help someone else going through the same thing. If this story touched your heart or made you think differently about family and boundaries, please give it a like. That simple action helps more people find stories like this one. If you want to hear more true stories about standing up for yourself and finding your worth, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message today, please share this video with them. Thank you for spending this time with me. I genuinely appreciate every single one of you who watches, comments, and supports this channel. Whatever you are facing in your own family relationships, I hope you find the strength to honor your own worth. May you be surrounded by people who love you for who you are, not what you can give them. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next story.